When it comes to the 1980s, there is no shortage of serviceable horror flicks to remind us horror lovers why that particular decade reigned supreme. While the 70s may have reinvented and sort of perfected the slasher with movies like Texas Chainsaw Massacre and of course John Carpenter's Halloween, the 80s just delivered on bringing to life some of the most iconic villains in the genre. A dream-stalking serial killer with knives for fingers, a summer camp slaughter committed by a giant in a hockey mask, or a sadistic demon who loves pain as much as pleasure. And we can't forget the slew of iconic B movies that have gone on to develop their own cult audiences and franchises that are still going today. I'm looking at you, Leprechaun.
A friend with weed is a friend indeed.
But today, my friends, we are going to be discussing a different kind of horror movie. A horror movie that kind of breaks the mold of the genre in its entirety. A creation written by someone outside of the industry that produced a film that exceeded the standards of unsettling cinema. Basically, today we're going to talk about 1987's The Stepfather and why I'm obsessed with it.
He's this whole fantasy thing, like we should be like the families on TV and grin and laugh and be having fewer cavities all the time.
I don't think we have to break up the family to be pumpkin.
The Stepfather follows the story of Jerry Blake, which is not his real name, by the way, as he pursues his ambitions of having the perfect family and the ideal suburban setup. You know what I mean. Nice house, backyard barbecues, children, love, home-cooked meals, and, of course, cold-blooded murder. As the film unfolds, we're given just a small taste of this character's motivation and backstory to be properly terrified of this ambiguously defined family man. Where other films of this era focused on killers who wear human faces for masks or have supernatural abilities that allow for multiple sequels and diminishing stakes for the killer, this movie just wants to show you what it would look like if evil was hiding in plain sight. In fact, The Stepfather goes as far as to show us what kids are really afraid of. A new parental figure that you don't know and can't trust.
My father hadn't died. There wouldn't be a stepfather.
I love this movie. It has so many qualities that make it hold up so well, and it really just tested audiences and our willingness to sit through a pseudo-slasher that prioritizes the characters over the body count. In turn, I think it actually makes the movie more scary. So, of course, today we are going to be watching The Stepfather and trying to figure out exactly why nearly 40 years later, I still get the creeps from this movie. I'm Kier with JoBlo Horror Originals, and you're watching Deconstructing. The Stepfather was written by American novelist Donald E. Westlake, who at the time had never written a screenplay for film. The film is not based on a specific novel, but rather a story written by Westlake and his collaborators to be adapted for film. It's a movie that sets a tone very early on and builds off of that tone to a satisfying yet inevitable conclusion. It's a quiet movie with beautiful and peaceful visuals and some scenes that feature nothing more than a couple of characters just talking.
How do you sleep at night, Jerry? I sleep like a baby. See, that's interesting.
Between the fact that most of this movie is free of any actual violence and the director Joseph Rubin set the story to take place mostly in broad daylight, the sinister nature of this movie all hinges on the characters, the context, and the implied origins and motive of a man who habitually slaughters innocent families. Man, there are just so many things to break down in today's show, and I'm gonna make a small amendment to the structure of today's breakdown. Rather than our usual layout, today we're gonna be analyzing the film through use of our 4 key categories. First, we'll cover the origin of the film and how it went from a spooky story on paper to the big screen and into the zeitgeist of classic films from the decade. Then, we're going to discuss the film's legacy in a very short segment before we take on a bonus category for today and break down the film's characters. Usually within slasher films, the only characters with any real depth are the coveted final girl or final female guy character, and in many cases, the killer is kind of the main draw. This movie's characters all deserve a small analysis for each one because they're all important in their own way, and there are only a handful of them, so I won't take up too much of your time.
I think my time is up.
Then we're gonna break out some JoBlo horror movie trivia to lighten the mood before we get to the main event, the movie's X Factor, where we talk about the one thing that this movie has to solidify its place in my heart and the hearts and minds of many who love this film. So, if you're ready, then make sure to get your story straight and drop a like on the video, and let's hit play on The Stepfather.
Hi, honey.
In 1971, a local New Jersey accountant by the name of John List would murder his entire family before vanishing and beginning a new life with a new family under an alias for nearly 20 years before being arrested for his crimes. List was living a brand new suburban life, complete with a wife and kids, when his neighbor recognized him from America's Most Wanted and called in a tip to the police. Between the shock value of a story like that and the insane amount of planning, luck, and skillful manipulation that it takes to pull it off, Westlake felt that he had the perfect elements for a thrilling tale about a family man who won't settle for anything less than the American dream.
All we need is a little order around here. Order!
By the year 1985, the film's screenplay was written and had received multiple passes from Westlake, Carolyn Leftcourt, and Brian Garfield. Director Joseph Rubin, a filmmaker who's gone on to bring us films like Sleeping with the Enemy and The Good Son, saw this screenplay as a unique approach to an otherwise well-explored subgenre. The movie shot in Vancouver, British Columbia in the fall, which provided the idealistic autumn atmosphere that the film is set in. The shoot was seemingly free of drama and went smoothly, with the cast enjoying their time on the set. Iconic actor Terry O'Quinn, or as most of you know him, John Locke, plays the lead role as the stepfather. His name, appearance, job, and personality change with every new family, but O'Quinn spends most of the movie's runtime as Jerry Blake, a charming, unassuming realtor who's suspected by his teenage stepdaughter to be more than just the Mr. Rogers of real estate. His portrayal in this first Stepfather movie is very unsettling because of his subtle reactions to the movie's many attempts to uncover his disguise. When his new persona starts peeling away, the people around him will grow increasingly suspicious of Jerry, and the slow yet enjoyable unraveling is nothing short of entertaining.
This house is for a family. You know what I mean? A family? Home sweet home?
Upon being released in January of 1987, the film was not a commercial success financially, but was well received by the majority of critics who reviewed it. This, of course, is with exception of the late great Roger Ebert, who felt that the film was an attempt to sell violence on its own without a story or context to support it. He quotes, "Violence itself seems to sell at the box office, even when it's divorced from any context. Maybe that's what the filmmakers were thinking. What often happens, though, is that in an otherwise flawed film, there are a couple of things that are wonderful. The Stepfather has one wonderful element: Terry O'Quinn's performance."
I guess I have to face it. Jerry Blake is the most wonderful man in the world.
Now, I gotta strongly disagree with Mr. Ebert on this one. I think this movie's context is what makes it so unsettling and wonderful. The movie's opening scene, which we're going to talk about soon, is the context for the rest of this story. So when the movie dips from this bloody mess into a more quaint and wholesome and character-driven family life, we're on edge with anxiety because we know what happened just before that. It's the way the movie doesn't give you the answers that draws you further and further and further in. Seriously, this is just one of the cleanest and most simple screenplays I've ever seen. And truthfully, this is a genre known for having simple plot and stories, so bravo. Now, let's talk a little bit about this movie's legacy and characters.
This kind of thing really gets to me, you know? That a man could be driven to do something like that to his own family.
Okay, now as far as this movie's legacy, let's keep it real. The Stepfather 2 was released in 1989 and was a direct sequel to the original film that would once again star Terry O'Quinn as the stepfather. I watched this movie as research for this video, and I realized after the fact that the story of the stepfather really just works best as a single standalone feature. The following installments would grow increasingly unbelievable to the point where The Stepfather 3 tried to continue the story with a different actor and muscled in some explanation that Jerry had facial reconstructive surgery to change his appearance. Unfortunately, that's nothing even close to what it takes to match this movie. Other than the 2 direct sequels, there was a 2009 remake which I have not seen and don't really plan to. There just isn't a need for me to watch this story play out anywhere other than this movie, as it's become one of my favorite thrillers of all time. And part of what makes the film work so well is its simplicity, yet attention given to its core characters and supporting characters. So let's talk about them.
His personal history was falsified and his prints were untraceable. We talked to a criminal psychologist.
We covered Jerry, right? Well, not enough. See, the thing that makes Jerry Blake different from someone like Michael Myers is that he isn't an aimless serial killer who hurts people for fun. He's actually more of a charming straight man who has motivations well beyond inflicting pain. Jerry is only after one thing from the looks of it. He just wants the good life. He wants a nice place to live, a beautiful wife and kids, and even a scruffy little pooch for his teenage daughter.
I can't tell you what his name is because he doesn't have one yet.
The problem is that Jerry's past keeps catching up to him, and in order to preserve his quality of life, he does things like this. There's an inherent earnestness to wanting a wholesome family life, and if our killer's motivation is to create the safest and most loving family possible, and his means of getting there are the exact opposite of being safe or loving, we have something really interesting on our hands, and a character that you can almost feel for, in a certain way. You know who doesn't feel for Jerry? His daughter Stephanie, played by slasher legend Jill Sholin. Steph is the only character who is immediately suspicious of Jerry, and she confides her feelings in her therapist. Her whole deal is that her dad is dead and she isn't thrilled about the relationship Jerry has built with her mom in the years since. She knows that there's something not right about Jerry despite his many attempts to throw her off of his trail. So when she comes close to finding the truth, Jerry kills her therapist and even goes as far as to plant a fake photo of a different person from his previous killings to convince her that he was not involved. Stephanie's character is a perfect foil to her mother, Susan, who is so lonely and desperate for love that she doesn't take any of her daughter's fears seriously until it's almost too late. Susan is not a fully three-dimensional character, but I think this film does well at giving her enough screen time to establish that she's possibly overlooking Jerry's red flags on purpose, because she, like Jerry, just wants a happy family. We also have some side characters like Dr. Bondurant, Steph's therapist and first person that we actually see Jerry kill. This character is much more than just another body for Jerry to dispose of though, but he's also the only person that believes Stephanie's fear. We also have Jerry's ex-brother-in-law who's tracking him down after Jerry's opening murder. And we have a few even smaller characters that help us flesh out the world. These characters are more textured and layered than similar characters would be in subsequent films and other slashers of the era. And that's what makes this film feel more well-rounded, even though there's not that many characters and only a few deaths.
Hey, I thought this was supposed to be a party. Hey, Tommy!
Okay, going back to the film's writer, Donald Westlake, part of the inspiration for Stephanie's character was based on Westlake's own stepdaughter. This is something that I'm sure you step-parents out there can probably relate to. His stepdaughter struggled with accepting Westlake as a real part of the family. Of course, Jill Sholin brought a lot of intensity to the role and even did most of her own stunts in the final confrontation of the movie, so
the one who's dangerous, you and that right hook.
And before we move on to the finale, let's see if you can answer this question. What classic novel was Jill reading while her parents were watching TV in the bedroom? Was it A, The Outsiders, B, The Catcher in the Rye, C, Pride and Prejudice, or D, The Shining? Comment your answers down below.
This is as good as it gets.
Okay, it's like this, guys. There are really 3 X factors to this movie, and I think all of them deserve a little bit of highlighting. I am gonna narrow it down to just one, but we got some things we gotta talk about first. First, I love the scene at the barbecue where Steph is in the basement when Jerry comes down and unknowingly breaks into an unhinged state right in front of her. There's a couple different scenes sprinkled throughout the film that show our guy struggling to hold it together while he's constantly trying to be normal, and they're all great. But this is the first time we see it in front of Stephanie, and it really is the first time we see this side of Jerry. The scene works well because it reminds the audience that this polite and loving man that we've been watching and spending time with is indeed the same maniac that murdered his family in the beginning. I also think a contender for the X Factor is when Jerry says this line.
Wait a minute. Who am I here?
This scene is the final moment of Jerry's facade that we witness before he goes full-blown homicidal. I like this because of what it says about Jerry's mental state when he does what he does. He tries so hard to hold everything together, and we're meant to assume that if he would have avoided suspicion, this would have never happened. But the real kicker is that it shows us that Jerry has already made the decision to kill his family. He rents a new house in a new town and gets a new job under a new identity, before returning home to Susan, who confronts him about his recent behavior. Moments before the confrontation, Jerry is just whistling, smiling, and joking around. Then at the drop of a hat, Jerry snaps. It is so fucking disturbing. But of course, the true X factor of the Stepfather and the true outstanding element of it is the film's opening scene. Seeing Terry O'Quinn doing a completely normal looking morning routine covered in blood, moments before a wide tracking shot reveals the sinister and blood-soaked living room that served as his family's unceremonious grave. I mean, that's how the movie starts. This one scene sells the entire movie, in my opinion. You watch it and you're along for the rest of the ride. It shows you an unspeakably evil act committed by somebody that, perhaps most scary of all, blends in with polite society and suburban life. He's somebody that would get close to you and you would never even know it. If you have not seen this movie, then it is clear to me that all we need is a little order around here.